Okay. Welcome everyone to our AI Roundtable discussion series. Today's title will be AI in the Liberal Arts and Humanities. Please allow me to introduce Professor Suzanne Miller, Chair of the English Department at City Tech. Since joining the faculty in 2013, she has inspired students and colleagues alike with her passion for teaching and her distinguished career in theater, including critical acclaimed plays like Mesmerized, a Ben Franklin science and history mystery, with an MA, MFA from Brown University and a rich history of playwriting, directing, and arts education. Professor Miller continues to shape the literacy and creative landscape at City Tech. If you'd like to learn more about Suzanne Miller projects, you can visit her website, suzmiller.com. That's SUZMILLER.com. And allow me to introduce our special guest, Professor Mike Sharples. Professor Sharples has a first degree in computational science and a PhD from the Department of Artificial Intelligence at the University of Edinburgh. Professor Sharples is Emeritus Professor of Educational Technology in the Institute of Educational Technology at the Open University, UK. Author of Story Machines, How Computers Have Become Creative Writers. And you can also learn more about Mike Sharples at mikesharples.org. And I believe Professor Sharples is about 7 o'clock right now at UK.
Yep, it's just coming up to just after 7 o'clock now.
7 o'clock. Well, thank you for joining us.
So good afternoon to you and good evening from me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And real quick, before we start, I do want to mention, if I can change my slides. Yeah, here we go. The topic of our talk, we're going to focus in on story machines, how computers have become creative writers. And Professor Sharples has, I will include a link in the chat if you're interested in purchasing the book. So from there, I will turn it over to our Dean of English Department, Suzanne Miller.
Okay, the chair. Yeah,
chair.
Dean.
Oops.
The dean is here, and I think he just got a little nervous when he heard Dean.
There's justice.
But that is okay. Thank you so much, Jose, for that wonderful intro, and thanks to ATOL for having this series, and to Professor Sharples for joining us. This is so exciting. I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I recommend it to everybody. It's fascinating on a number of levels, which we'll get into now. I'd love for everybody, before we get started, to just have this question in the back of your mind. This is something to underpin the entire conversation, which is we know at this point that AI can write stories. We know that. But the real question, just to think about, and maybe this will change as we talk, your answer might change. Should AI be writing stories? Should AI be writing fictional poems or stories or, original material like that? So that's kind of a question for you to just mull over. But I'd love to start with this question. I'm going to call you Mike because we already decided we could do that, right? Okay. So many people think of AI as a new phenomenon, but after reading your book, I thought that's what I thought. But after reading your book, I realized it was just maybe perhaps new branding that we've come to discuss it this way. Your book takes us way back to the first impulses that humans had to depend on artificial intelligence, or to at least look at a way to jump over the sometimes painful task of thinking, of original thought. How can we get around it? And you bring up the Eureka machine and some other historic times that did this, that used this, that sort of followed this impulse to jump over having to make up a thought. And one of the things also was lulls, but when we were talking earlier, you were talking about lulls AI is a different thing. So if you would just share for our audience the Eureka machine, lulls AI, these different times in history where automatic thinking or AI has come in.
Yeah. Okay, so there's been a long fascination with how you can automate creativity. I don't know if you remember Gulliver's Travels, so Jonathan Swift, and that he went to visit an academy. So Gulliver went to visit an academy, and in that academy there was a strange machine, and that there were students who were turning the handles on this machine, and every time they turned the handles, it produced a new academic document. And that he was being shown this as the great new way to automate writing. And that was centuries ago. So there's been a fascination by writers in particular about are they really themselves automatones? Where do these words come from? Are we as humans really just writing machines? And what makes us creative? So there are two aspects, I think. One of them is around what you've said. So can we make writing easier by getting a machine to do it? But the other aspect is trying to understand ourselves as writers by automating some aspect of writing and then seeing what's wrong, why doesn't it work? And trying to then understand ourselves through this partial automation of writing. And you mentioned the Eureka machine. And that's a fascinating story because it goes back over a century. In 1845, in London, there was a demonstration of a machine that could write Latin verse. And this was demonstrated to a sort of startled visitors to what was the Egyptian Hall in Piccadilly in London. And they went in and they saw a gentleman pull a handle, and this machine whirred away. It was, you could hear the whirring of clockwork, and then slowly in little windows, letters appeared, formed perfect Latin verse. Hexameter Latin verse. Every time the lever was pulled, it produced a new line of Latin verse, and it could generate over 26 million different. Generate over 26 million different perfectly correct lines of Latin verse. So it was the first creative artificial device for generating language. And at that time, he saw it as the person who developed it, John Clark, saw it as a thinking machine. So there was a lot of discussion even then about artificial creativity.
And you can imagine students at the time running to that machine and pulling the lever to do their homework, which we're going to get to that, because I know a lot of people in this audience are curious about what we do, how we face this. Some of us see it as an epidemic, some of us see it as exciting, different, and some of us are in the middle. So we just to rest assured everyone, we will be getting to how to approach this with our students, or how to think about it. But I would like to know, because there's so much interesting research in your book. After all your research and writing, can you pinpoint a time or a place for the birth of AI as we know it today? When would you say it sort of started?
Okay, so the first computers, there was fascination. So Alan Turing and colleagues, they were fascinated about how computers could be creative. And so I guess that was kind of the birth of AI as these scientists with the very early computers started to think about whether they could be creative. But the birth of the phrase artificial intelligence was at a conference in Dartmouth in 1956. But by the 1960s, there was certainly a lot of discussion about thinking machines, whether AI can be, the phrase AI was already in currency, whether it could be creative, whether it could generate prose, whether it could even write novels. So even by the 1960s, there was this kind of discussion. And so people started to build computer programs that could generate text. Partly, it wasn't so much that they wanted to replace humans. They didn't. They wanted to understand the creative process. And here was a device that could model, albeit in a very limited way, the human creative process. And having a model to be able to test creativity was something we'd never had before. And so that was the main reason for doing it, to try and understand human creativity rather than replace the writer.
So there's really two ways to be thinking about AI. Then there's, as you're saying, it's a model for helping us understand how we think or how we create. but then there's the way to use it passively to get it to do things for us. And I think that's where we find ourselves now. And people who have not grown up with, who are older, who understand the world before computers, I do feel like we're able to have a little bit more control over when we use what and why we use what. But I think, again, for our students, there's not this, again, before your book, I hadn't thought about it this way as actually helpful to take a look at our own creative process. So students, I think, and I'm not going to say all students, but a lot of students who don't have that understanding of life before the computer just see it as a way to get things done. So so we're going to have to strategize about that.
Yeah, we are. And that's, this is generative AI, which is something pretty new, really since 2017, 2018, when it came with GPT-2 and then ChatGPT. And it took everyone by surprise, not least the OpenAI company and Microsoft. They didn't think at the beginning that it was going to be that successful and that creative. So it has taken everyone by surprise. And yeah, it can do creative things. It could do creative works of art. It can do creative writing. There's no doubt about it that it can create works that look as if they are produced by a creative human being or by now an A-grade student. And so it's not surprising that students latched onto this very early, usually before academics latched onto it, as a way of getting their homework done, getting their writing done. And why shouldn't they? If you're setting a 3,000-word essay and an AI can write it better than you can, then why not press the button and do it? However, at the same time, and there's been surveys of students, they genuinely, most of them want to learn. And what they want more than anything else is clarity. So, they want to find ways of learning with AI, where AI can help them to do routine tasks, but also that will help them to learn and will allow them to learn and to be creative. So we've got to find a way through with this new AI.
So I think our responsibility as educators is really to help them understand, and we might have to do a lot of rethinking in terms of what we're asking for as assessment tools. But, we're not really that interested in the product at the end necessarily, the paper. We're more interested in the process. And if you're using generative AI in that way, the press a button way, you are actually skipping over the whole point, the process. And that's painful. I think that's what I always tell my students. Like, if you're in pain, that's a really good thing. It's like if you ride, and we were talking about this metaphor before, Mike, if you need to get to the dentist across the park and you're late, you jump on a electric bike and you get there. But you haven't, that's a really good reason to use the electric bike. But when you are trying to build your calf muscles or your core or whatever, then you need to use the bike. And for them to understand this difference, I think they get it with like, if I use that metaphor, they get it. But it's a lot of we're going to have to get a little bit dirty in terms of getting our hands in there, changing up the way we do assessment, the way we do assignments.
Absolutely. And I think looking at ways of interacting with AI that don't take away human creativity, but actually augment human creativity. And just give you one example of that. So you probably all heard about prompting. And a prompt is just basically a way of telling AI to do something. But there was a colleague who thought this great idea of getting the AI to prompt you. So turning it on its head.
Mm.
And getting the AI to ask you, how would you like to start your story? What would you like your characters to be? Have you thought about the setting? And getting the AI to act as an interrogator, as a prompt to you. So that's just one way that you can use AI in a more creative way. And I think we've got to think about these new pedagogies, these new ways of teaching and learning in a world that's infused by AI.
So the critic in me is saying, well, that's what peers are for. That's what peer review is for. That's what writing groups are for. This is ridiculous. We don't need these computers to do this. And then I get really mad. But I think that that is perhaps not healthy in this we're in it, right? Like there's no way
Yeah,
to not be in it
yeah.
in the AI infused world. Yeah.
Sure, it means you should have a good peer group, and the peers can be helped develop to do that sort of prompting, and but for the students who are sitting at home having to do an assignment, then either you can just give it the prompt to the AI, or you can have some of these tools where the AI is helping you. And I think we need to think about how AI works in this mix of students and teachers and peers now. And does AI have a role? And I don't know the answer to that, but we need to ask that question. What role should AI have in academic creativity?
Do you think it's important for us to start talking about it? You mentioned AI literacy as my view on it is it's very seductive, it's very addictive. And I have tried it and I like it when I'm doing a report and I just don't have time to polish this up or whatever, put it in and great. I would never use it in my own creative work, but so far that's how I've used it. So, but it is a slippery slope like social media or even a drug where you might find yourself at the bottom, having gone down this slope with no way to get out. So I wonder if we have responsibility as educators to really um, explain how it might be taking away some creative impulses. The generative AI, the kind, that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the starting point for composition for creative writing has to be human creativity, human empathy, and human experience. So what is it that we as humans have that AI doesn't have? And the starting point for that is that we have human experience and human empathy. The AI can simulate that, but it's only humans who can smell new mown grass, who can watch a sunset, who can fall in love at the moment anyway. So let's start from that, what it is that makes us human. And then how does that then feed into the power of human creativity? What creativity comes from empathy, from experience, from being in touch with the real world, and to build on that. So I would say there's a real challenge to writing instructors, to academics, to say, not just keep on asking students to do the 3,000-word essay, but to say, what are the aspects of real human creativity, and then how can we build on that? And for that, yes, you have to put AI aside.
Right. We have talked a lot in the English department lately about, or some of us, about going back to writing in class assignments, reading physical books, etc. But I also think there is this Carrie Hall, who does some of our curriculum development, uh, was talking about putting this strand, exactly what you're saying, putting this theme into one of the composition themes for the semester to be to ask that question, what is it to be human? And make the readings around that. And then you could really have a natural conversation about AI with that as your theme. I think that that's sort of leaning into it as you're suggesting, as opposed to we were talking before that this session started, I feel like we're still skipping along the surface of trying to figure it out versus getting underneath and saying what we got to get we've got to get on almost like a fundamental level here with the students and have these discussions with them. We can't just say you're going to be punished, you can't do it, don't do it. Yeah.
I think we have to look at the positive aspect as well. So, poet Wordsworth, he described his poetic writing as emotion recollected in tranquility. So he deliberately went out to summon up emotion. He went out to the hills of the Lake District in Britain to deliberately summon up emotion. And then he went back to his writing room and tried to recreate that emotion in tranquility and to then use that as a basis for his writing. I think we need to look at some of those sorts of techniques, not necessarily going out into the mountains, but saying how can writing be based on human experience, human emotion, human interaction? And I think that's where some peer discussions come in, for example. And particularly in these turbulent times, what does it mean to be able to, reflect on emotion in a more tranquil way? And writing can do that.
Yeah, and I do think that you're right. Just relying on the so many words essay as our, I mean, this is a very old way of doing assessment with students, and even taking the word of assessment out. What are we actually are to blame for focusing so much on the product, actually. The process, particularly in a composition, first year composition class, should really be the process. That should be the focus.
Yeah.
So of course you have to
Yes.
grade the student, etc. So how do you then? But
Yeah.
that's a problem for us to solve, and it feels like a workable something we could solve.
And that was the starting point, really, for the work that I did with Raphael, my colleague, on story generation, which was trying to say, how can we understand that process, that creative process? Because we really don't have we didn't have a language for it. And so using AI gives you a kind of process language, a computational language to be able to talk about human creativity and to model it. In the same way that if you're trying to understand climate, you would build climate models now. You use those climate models not to create artificial climates, but to understand the climate that we're living in. It's the same with creativity. And it was those kind of models that we built over the last 20, 30 years, which can model the process of human creativity and try to understand it in greater depth. So it's a research tool, and a fascinating research tool, rather than a substitute.
Yeah, and I do wonder if we need to bring in people, professors, students, graduate students from computer science, or to understand the technology of what we're using, instead of just seeing it as this, oh, this is going to do it for me button, but what's behind the scenes, what's behind the curtain of what's happening with when we put in a prompt, or it does still very much feel very passive, and at best passive, and at worst cheating, right, at this point. So that there's still not we're still not understanding what the heck we're using, or students may not know. Yeah.
And in that way, generative AI is a step backwards. It's
Hmm.
because it builds this huge, great neural network, which basically hoovers up all of the data from the World Wide Web and puts it into this gigantic interconnected network. And then that's used to generate text. But we don't know what's going on inside that network. We're only just starting to be able to probe it, in somewhat the same way that you use MRI scans into the human brain. Whereas the sort of AI that we did, which was symbolic AI, we built these systems in so as we could understand the processes. We built them explicitly. And so I think if, in a sense, we're going backwards with generative AI because it just does it. It does it in a very powerful way, but we really don't know how it does it. And that's both limiting, and it's also scary as well, because if we don't know what's going on side there. We don't know what mistakes it's making. We don't know what biases it has. And we don't know how it's going to develop in either a helpful or an unhelpful way. So there are lots of limitations with generative AI that the previous generation of AI didn't have.
Do you think there's a threat to, I
Is
think
this open
humans,
discussion?
no, it's not. It's not open until there will be Q&A in a minute, whoever just asked that. Um, there's a threat to, or I'm asking you, is there a threat to our ability to tell stories? Telling stories, humans, since the cave drawings, we know, since the forever we've told stories. And there was a fear, I know there was a fear when TV came out and movies came out that theater, for example, would go away. And theater just never went away. So I know the impulse to tell stories will not go away, because that's part of the human experience. But will our ability be eroded again if we stop using this, if we keep running away from the thinking piece?
So, so the first thing I would say is we can't help telling stories, as you've said. We're the only animals that can tell stories. And it's been called mental time travel. We can reflect on the past, we can plan the future, and we can tell stories to persuade each other about the past and the future. So we are unique in that way, and we can't, it's part of our consciousness. We can't help telling stories. So that's the positive side of it. And we find new ways to tell stories, whether it's through interacting with computer games or whether it's through online chat. So we're finding the way we tell stories is changing. I think so we all would always do that. But I think the bigger question is, how can we help students to craft stories that have style, have structure, have complexity, so that we're not just telling stories in the moment. Because the way young children tell stories is a kind of what next? I do this, I
Right.
do this, with stories in the moment. So it's not about, are students going to tell stories in the future? They are, but it's how can we help them to develop those structured, complex, reflective stories. And we can either say, well, AI doesn't have a role there. It has to be just a human process. Or we could say, can AI help us to understand how we tell stories and to support us? And I guess I would go down that second route, which is in a world that's going to be infused by AI, how can AI help us to tell better and more complex stories?
And we were talking before the session, you said you've actually spoken with lots of universities all over the world, and you mentioned Sydney. And I want to reassure people in the room that we are not alone in this struggle, as we know, but sometimes it does feel like it's just your students and just your classroom. So could you just repeat what you were talking about with Sydney? And yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, firstly, universities around the world were taken by surprise, really, in about 2022 when ChatGPT came along. And it just wasn't expected. And it was students who started using these tools, and universities had to respond. And because I was writing this book, I got blogging and about story generation and then AI in education. And so I got into doing consultancy and talks to universities. And every university I've been to, without exception, they say, we're behind everybody else. We need to catch up. We haven't got a coherent policy. We need to do more work on AI literacy. So partly I've been trying to reassure universities that they're not behind everybody else, but we do have to work together. There's no point in every institution creating its own AI literacy program, for example. We do have to understand what's good pedagogy, good ways of teaching and learning with AI. And so I've really been trying to share these good practices. And there are a few universities that really are taking the lead, and the University of Sydney, particularly around assessment. And because this has been the two huge things that all universities have said is one is about AI literacy, and we need a program of AI literacy, particularly critical AI literacy. And the other is around assessment. And the way that Sydney has approached it is to say there are basically two sorts of assessment. There's assessment of learning and assessment for learning. And assessment of learning is the exams, and we need to make that rigorous. We need to make sure that we maintain academic integrity. We need to make sure that if students, say they're writing, they really are writing, which means either invigilated exams or oral examinations, but less of them. It's not necessary to do all the assessment, those rigorous exams, and also looking at authentic assessment, project work, process-based assessment. And then there's assessment for learning. And assessment for learning is around how can you use whatever tools are appropriate to help the students learn and then to assess that process of learning. And there AI does have a role. You've said you can automate the drudgery, the things you really don't want to do, whether it's formatting a report or writing an email that you don't particularly want to write. but also helping students to really be creative. And I think one of the biggest strengths of generative AI is it's a tool for creativity. And I really think we haven't explored that enough. It can help you through the design process. So seeing writing as a design activity, helping you through the process of brainstorming ideas, of structuring ideas, of debating and discussing, of creating written style, not substituting, but helping the students through that creative process. And so I'd really like to see that distinction between assessment of learning and assessment for learning.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I think that distinction is something I had not thought of before. I really just had it all in one big bucket. Um, but I did want to ask you because this book was published in 2022, and as you mentioned, 2022 it all kind of exploded. What was your reaction to that when you had finished and then everything sort of changed? I mean, I still think this is a fact, like it's still very, everything you say in here is still extremely relevant. So it wasn't like it was, not relevant anymore, but what was your reaction?
So I was really fortunate with Raphael to get very early access to GPT-2 and then GPT-3. So I got access by the simple way of just asking the CEO of OpenAI, could I have early access? And so I got access to it while we were writing the book. So it's up to date with GPT-3, which
Right.
was the big game changer in ChatGPT. And so I was able in the book to put in not just what was happening, but also some predictions about what would happen next, around agent-based AI, and around what I think is we've really underestimated, which is social AI. That so far we've been thinking far too much about an individual writing a prompt and getting a response. But what's going to happen very soon is AI is going to be embedded into our social world. It's going to be part of social media. You're going to have conversations as groups with AI. AI could run tutorials and seminar groups. Could be very good at doing that. So again, we've got to think as academics and as just citizens, what should and shouldn't AI be doing in the social world? And that's going to be a huge question, much bigger than the questions we're asking at the moment about AI.
Right. And that does return to my original questions of should AI be writing stories? And the reason I ask like that is because I'm thinking when I read when I read a book, it's kind of I maybe that I'm alone in this, but I have kind of a contract with the writer, with a silent contract that I'm reading their words. I'm often looking at their picture throughout the book, um, saying like, "What are you talking about?" or "Great job" or whatever. But
Mhm.
if I were to find out that the book was written by a computer, that would have an effect on me. I think I would be, and I know there was always this thing of we were kind of obsessed for a time, maybe we still are, about do you think this was written by a person or a computer? Which, that's a question we ask. And you have a little test in the book, and I got two right and two wrong.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess my question is, what you know, does it matter that a human writes a book or not, right? I think it does. I think that um I don't understand. I guess video games maybe, but I don't understand the point of a computer writing a poem or writing a story. Yeah,
Okay. So I'm probably going to be controversial here. I think
great.
so. I think there are 2 points. I mean, one that I mentioned already, which is it shows what computers can do that people can't, and what people can do that computers can't. For instance, it can simulate human emotion and human experience, but what then does that simulation mean? If the computer says, I can taste honey, I can smell new mown grass. What does that mean?
Mhm.
And what does it mean to have human experience in a novel or in a poem? And so we can compare what a computer writes against humans in terms of the limitations and of both human and computer. The other, I think, is that AI lives in a world, which is a very different world to which we live in, but in some sense it lives in an online world. It's trawled, most of the data from the World Wide Web. It's very soon with AI agents, we'll be engaging with other AI agents in ways that we can't understand. And if you just say that, it's incredibly scary because there will be millions of these AIs that are interacting with each other. So getting them to tell stories about how they are interacting is a way of trying to understand and interrogate the online world. So I would say it's vitally important to get computers to tell stories about their interactions online so that we can understand and control them.
It's kind of what you say in the very last page of the book about getting the AI to tell us what's going on in its own processes. And right now, if I understand it, AI can only look back, can only use what's already been put into the web versus being visionary, right? Or no, is that changing at this point?
I think that's changing.
Okay.
And it's changing. So there's been a huge debate in the AI community going back to the 1940s with Turing and others about, and before that to the 19th century about can computers, can machines really be creative? And it all depends what you mean by creative. So if by creative you mean can it reorganize concepts in new ways, and from that generate language or semantic ideas, concepts that we hadn't thought of before? Yes, it probably can, because it's that kind of combinatorial creativity, and it can do that. It's very good at doing that. It's very good at coming up with new ways of expressing perhaps that we hadn't thought of. But then there's another kind of creativity, which is the grand historic creativity, the creativity of the great writers, of the great musicians, the great composers, the great artists. And again, I would come back to that complex, mysterious, painful human experience. And can it create the sort of writing that's embedded in the pain, the complexity of human experience? And no, I think it can't. It may in the future be able to describe the complexity and the pain of computational experience, and certainly the web is going to be a very painful place. But I think we still have this space for great creativity where we can express the anguish, the joy, the love of human experience. And I would like to keep it that way. Maybe in the future there will be embodied AI that can go out and run in the grass, but at the moment, it's our prerogative.
That's excellent news. So I'm going to pause right here, checking with Jose. How are we doing on the chat? Are there a lot of? I imagine there might be some questions in there.
We have a few questions.
Say again?
We do have a few questions, but should we go to the questions, or you want to?
Well, no, we can still chat. I just didn't know if we had a lot. I could. Let's have a couple more. Let's just wait a few more minutes and then we'll. So if you have a question, you can put it in the chat now.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, and we will get to that. So in terms of, I did want to get your thoughts on journalism. Are journalists going to still be? I say this because journalism is a creative work, of course, but we've already seen chatbots taking over a lot of news production, if I'm not mistaken. Any thoughts on that, on how journalism will?
Again, I think it depends on what you mean by journalism. So if journalism is reprocessing news from Reuters and other agencies, and putting that into words that can appeal to a mass audience, then yeah, I can do that. It can do it
Right.
really well.
It's already doing that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
If journalism is going out into a war, into a into a homeless shelter, into a a riot, and being able to not only describe it but to explain it and to interpret it, then again, I think there is a huge role for human journalists, including citizen journalists. So I think that there is, a huge opportunity, and we have, with new ways of capturing and new ways of explaining and new ways of interpreting. I think, we have a new kind of journalism which is going to be more embedded, which is going to be more direct, and which is going to be more human. So I would like to think that we have opportunities for, a new type of journalism which is more experiential and less interpretive.
Yeah. And again, that is another thing to bring to our students' awareness is the different approach. Because I do think that sometimes students don't think about journalism in that way that you're talking about it.
Do
Yeah.
you ever send your students out, to to a place where they know there's going to be emotion, and to capture that and to interpret it?
Well, I used to send students on different walks or, or to go to the farmer's market or something like that. Not a protest, but although it's tricky times to be telling students what to do in those areas. But
Yeah.
I think I think it's a really great point that we are still very much in our classrooms. Um, so yeah, I in a way, this whole time that we're in with AI and has made me want to really, like we were talking about before, return to some of the old ways of uh, writing, reading, going out, moving,
Mhm.
moving the body to get
Mhm.
to figure out what you're trying to say is a very, in fact, before this, I was kind of behind in getting my notes together and I was supposed to meet some friends for lunch and I was going to cancel. And then I thought, let me just go. And as I was walking, I was getting more ideas for this talk. So I thought, okay, that's good. It's good to get outside, get out away from the computer screen. You'll actually have more stimuli to help you. So it's a little anecdote. I think we can go to questions now. I I I would love to hear what people are thinking.
Sure, definitely. I see Maria Tachaki. And I'm not pronouncing that wrong. Or Maria,
No.
you wanna go ahead?
Yeah, yes, Plahotsky. And I posted a couple of questions and comments, so I guess, if you want to address any, just choose whichever seems the
Well,
most compelling.
Sure.
I
What
see
about
you've asked one. The question of creativity is
creativity? Yeah.
complicated by definition. Um, Synthesis, bricolage, creative. Um, I mean, I guess I would go to my great mentor, Margaret Bowden, who was a researcher in creativity. She was also a researcher in AI, and she tried to understand human and machine creativity. And she makes this distinction that I've already kind of alluded to between P creativity and H creativity. So P creativity is that kind of synthesis and bricolage, what she calls mapping, exploration, and transformation of conceptual spaces. So you find a mental space and you look for ways of transforming it, whether setting into opposition, if you're trying to develop characters in a story, how would those characters be in opposition? How would they relate to the setting? How could you change the setting? So that's what she would call P creativity. And it can be fascinating, and it's certainly what's taught in schools of creative writing. And then there's H creativity, which is historic creativity, the sort of creativity that you think, how could they have done that? How could Shakespeare have used language in such creative and imaginative ways? How could Mozart at such a young age have been able to envisage an entire symphony? So that sort of creativity we really are still trying to understand. And it was one of the reasons that, Raphael and I were trying to develop AI, creative AI systems where you could essentially look inside its mind, interrogate it, to try and understand what is, the limitations of creativity, and how does this creativity work? Is it about being able to look down on an area in a conceptual area and transform it as a whole? So being able to visualize an entire conceptual space, with the composer being able to see an entire musical composition and then change the parameters of it. And if it is, then is that something that could be modeled? Could we have tools to help us to be able to transform these larger conceptual spaces? So I would make this distinction between P creativity, psychological creativity, and H creativity, this broader creativity of being able to change, to reorient whole conceptual spaces.
I see another question from Scott Dolly. I don't know, Scott, do you want me to read it, or?
Sure, you can read it, Jose, or I can. It's up to you.
Sure, go ahead, Scott.
All right, I'll read it. So if an aspect of powerful art is the artist's ability to, or good fortune to tap into zeitgeist, to what extent do you feel AI is capable of doing this? Tapping into zeitgeist and producing art that reflects it. And I wonder about the implications for if it is capable of tapping into zeitgeist and producing work that reflects it. One imagines that its speed at doing this is going to be so much greater than humans. It'll always be ahead of us, and I wonder what the impact that would be on production methods and the rest.
I think that AI is going to be quite good at doing that because it is able to process, to have access to a huge amount of contemporary data and information, which, if the zeitgeist is anything, it is, what's happening at the moment. And AI can tap into what's happening at the moment. And not only that, AI is going to influence the zeitgeist. It already is doing that. It's influencing social media, it's influencing politics. So it's not that AI is outside the zeitgeist. To some extent, AI is the zeitgeist. We are all talking about AI. We're talking about how AI is disrupting education, but also disrupting politics, disrupting sports, so much else. So I think it's not just going to tap into the zeitgeist, it's going to produce and be part of the zeitgeist. And so we're going to have to find new ways of interrogating AI. This is what I was coming back to before, why we need to get AI to tell its stories, I think, because if we want to understand this AI-infused world, we have to find ways of getting AI to interpret that world for us in ways that we can't understand. Because the real scary thing, I think, is if AI competes on efficiency, which is what's happening at the moment. You're getting these language models that are posting, this one is more efficient than that. AI that competes on efficiency is going to sideline human beings because humans are intrinsically inefficient. For example, we communicate in natural language. Natural language is not the best way of communicating. So AI is going to find its own way. It already is finding its own way of communicating, which is going to sideline humans. So if we want to have ethical AI, I think we really need to find ways to get it to describe the zeitgeist, to explain the zeitgeist to us in ways that we can understand. So I think it's a really important question.
I do like the idea of interrogating AI and having our students do that.
Yeah.
I like that term. It's strong, it's a little scary, and it's active. Again, my whole beef with AI is it makes us passive as we use it now, But this idea of interrogating it, bringing it into the conversation with us, controlling it, It feels
and
better.
demanding that it explain itself and
Yes.
explain what it's doing, because AI in the future is going to be less and less explanatory. So we need to force it to explain itself.
Yep.
Yeah, in ways we can understand.
We have
Yeah.
another question. Jonathan Natov, my buddy, he's asking, excellent conversation. Would you agree that it is more useful to think about our relationship with AI rather than as a tool? There seems to be a tendency to treat it as a calculator where we need to learn how to use it.
I think there are a lot of metaphors for AI at the moment, most of them unhelpful, like a stochastic parrot or a calculator. It's like any analogy, there's a grain of truth in it. But usually these metaphors are, now because it's moving so fast, it's about AI that was a year ago. So it's certainly a lot more than just a statistical parrot. It's not just taking what's on the web and regurgitating it. So I think we need new metaphors for AI. And again, this is where human creativity comes in. What are the appropriate metaphors for AI that's rapidly changing? And particularly when you get agent-based AI that's coming. And just very briefly, what agent-based AI is, rather than giving prompts where you have to instruct AI in very clear and somewhat rigid language how to perform a task, you will give it a high-level goal, like design a creative writing course for my students, and it will go off and do it. That will be all you will need to ask. So, and there will be hundreds, thousands of companies that will be setting up, tools, operations around agent-based AI, and it will be able to go out into the web and perform these tasks. So, and in the future, it will be able to go out into the real world and perform some of these tasks. So agent-based AI is going to be hugely important. And again, we need to understand and we need to interrogate it.
And that's already here. And I want to just clarify, I think Professor Natop was saying that we shouldn't just think of it as a calculator. He and I have talked about this a lot, that people mistakenly use it as a tool, blah, blah, blah. But it's, as you're saying, much more in woven into our conversation with, what we're asking it to do. It's not just a tool. But the agent thing is already here, right? I have a friend who planned a 3-week trip to Japan and just said, plan my trip or something, and they came up with an itinerary. And again, what's missing there is the joy of and the sweat of planning yourself or planning your own class. So I feel like there's a hollow that's going to happen when you then go on this trip planned by this thing, or you teach this class that's been planned by this thing. Again, if you're engaging with it, if there's a back and forth there, maybe that's more satisfying.
Okay, so that's a really good question to ask, what is joyful? And to a student, then probably writing a 3,000-word essay isn't joyful.
Correct.
So in terms of creativity and composition, what is joyful composition? What is composition that you really want to make?
Right.
And how can we instill some joy, infuse some joy into the act of creative writing? So that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, it would. That's a really wonderful way to put it.
Here's another question. I think this is Lee Gold. Does thinking about the unconscious mind, such as space of dreams, etc., ask us to think about limits of AI as well in terms of creativity?
That's a fascinating question. And there have been, and I mentioned it in the Story Machines book, about attempts to model human dreaming and human dreamlike thought. Because again, it's something that we don't really understand. It's been talked about in terms of left and right hemisphere, and the dreaming is the right hemisphere, and the analytic is the left hemisphere. It's been talked about in terms of high and low forms of consciousness. So in dreaming, you have this sort of low state of consciousness where you can let your mind freewheel. And then you can reflect on that and then process it. And a good writer can go into that sort of freewheeling state and then start to reflect on it in order to do the writing. And when you come to actually do the writing, because you have to externalize it, then you have to go then through this rhythm of expressive thinking, of freewheeling, and then reflecting and creating. And so trying to understand writing as a rhythmic process, and in terms of states of consciousness, I think is, it's something that writers, philosophers, and academics have been trying to do for a long time. And one of the things that I and colleagues at the AI department at Edinburgh were fascinated by doing was seeing whether you could model those states of consciousness and what it meant to model those states of consciousness in a creative act. And that's what my colleague Raphael has been doing. He's been trying to model the creative process of the human writer in terms of states of consciousness and how those are expressed on the page. So
That's really
it's a
cool.
fascinating thing.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it was Salvador Dali that he would go in this dreamlike state and wake up and do the painting. We have a question from George. George, Guido, we want to go ahead and talk. I see you there on the webcam.
Yeah, my question boils down essentially to, are we playing with fire? Is this really a low risk endeavor for the arts?
I think we are playing with fire. And you could argue that the arts has always played with fire. Much of theatre through the 80s has been playing with fire because theatre is a way of shedding a light, bringing into focus some of the greatest problems, issues in society. Artists have always played with fire. So we've now got, many new fires, including AI. So should we play with AI? I mean, musicians have worked with machines for a long time, with synthesizers, with electronic music. I don't think writers have done enough, actually, in terms of that kind of creative playing with fire. So, one challenge would be, can you work with AI in the same way that some musicians work with synthesizers, work with electronic music, perhaps to create a new composition, a new style of creative writing that merges AI and human experience. I would like to see a bit more playing with fire, but I know what you're talking about, which is that AI is going to be very threatening to society, and it needs to be brought under control. And there's a whole lot I could say about how it needs to be brought under control quickly, not just to be ethical, but also in academic world, to be educational as well. It's not just enough for AI to be ethical. It needs to be pedagogically valid. It needs to be, representing good education. And there are a lot of companies at the moment that are peddling AI tutors as if they're going to solve education, and they're not.
So I think just to remark on something you said, one thing I've heard recently is we made a mistake with, let's not make the same mistake we made with social media, which was we didn't take it seriously enough. Hoped it would go away kind of thing, and it's caused there's been good things, bad things, whatever, but it's also the damage it's done to some of our young people it's so intense that we didn't see that coming. So I've heard that, and I think that's getting at what you're saying is, yes, it's fire, but we can't ignore it. Which
we can't ignore it, but again, it goes back to control and to interrogating it. I think we can't ignore it. It's because if the US tries to stop it, then China or
right.
Other countries will continue with it, and it's out there. There are over 1,000 large language models and many millions of apps based on them. So it's already out there and it's already developing. But what we can do is we can understand it, we can challenge it, we can interrogate it, and we can not impose restrictions, but you have to build into the design of the AI certain ethical principles, and I would say for academia, certain educational principles that you build into the design of the AI. And that's a creative act. It's not just an act of restricting, putting walls around it. It's building it from the ground up in ways that are going to be empowering. And by that, I mean, there are some companies like Anthropic, for example, that have built large language models on ethical principles. They started with training it on the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights before they gave it more general training. There's none that I know of that train their AI on educational principles. And yet there are plenty of principles of good education, good pedagogy, and how you support the creative act and so on. You can build AI on educational principles, but nobody's done that yet. So I would say instead of trying to impose restrictions, which governments are going to do anyway, and they need to, we need to look about how you fundamentally build AI that is not only ethical, but also educational and empowering.
We're almost out of time. I think Professor Schmerler, you wanted to jump in and ask a question, or?
I don't want to take us over time. I was just mentioning the Oulipo group and exercises in style. You know, it's 99 retellings of the same story, the Cadavera Key. These are great things that exercise, that unlock ourselves, that we use writing to unlock the subconscious. That writing is a tool, that we do the writing for this thing. And, you know, and to examine our lives, to examine ourselves. So if we kind of keep that exciting playing with fire, that Promethean, we've always been playing with fire when we were created, just locking into that. So I was wondering, I see you nodding your head, do you agree? And that's the answer to my question.
I would like to see us continue to play with fire. And you know, it is going to be an AI-infused world. It's going to be a very different world, as we know, socially, politically, environmentally, in terms of global interactions, in terms of culture. So it's going to be a very different world we're moving into, and AI is going to be part of it. And I would really like to see us playing with fire in a productive way. And by that, I mean, you know, finding ways to control, interrogate, work with AI that is on our terms, on human terms, and respects human emotions, human experience, and human skills.
And there's there's a comment from, I hope I'm saying your name right, Caesar, saying that you've done that very thing. You're saying you created your own assistant?
Yes, I created a AI assistant design from one of my courses, and I have seen the change immediately. I mean, the improvement overall by the use of the students independently from me. It's like having extra hand right there, because the content was created by me with all the content that I have done for many years, and I just put the PDFs and analyze the questions and prompt it in a way that will assist me on that. And the students have been using it successfully, and sometimes to the point that I think, well, is this a good idea?
Because you're replacing yourself?
Yeah, so exactly. So, but it has been helpful. It has been a wonderful experience so far.
And I would just say, and I see Patricia has her hand up, we could take that question, but I don't want to lose sight of the active role we have to play as educators in figuring this out, and not just saying, oh, well, kids these days, you know, we can't do that. We have to break it we have to break our models a little bit.
Absolutely. And also we can't just say, oh, well, AI companies, you know, oh, we can't understand them. We have to be in there. You know, the AI companies, and, you know, I've got a background in AI, so I know, you know, some of the strengths and limitations of AI companies. Firstly, most of them, almost all of them, know nothing about education except for the fact that they've, you know, been to school and university. So they know nothing about, you know, how to teach effectively, how to help students learn. And so, you know, if they pretend that they do, it's almost certain they don't. So we have an advantage there, and we really need to build on our strengths, and we need to work productively, I think, with some of these companies to say, you know, we know about teaching and learning, we know about what makes, you know, how you build creativity in people and students. So let's work with you and let's work to build really sound, educationally valid AI. I'd much rather do that than just say, you know, oh, we can't understand them.
Yeah. Patricia, do you have a quick question? Do you want to
It
yeah.
was just a statement. Something happened this week that was really interesting for me. I teach a course that has they have to analyze Aristotle's artistic proofs and rhetorical devices, and they can do that in an essay. And I found that it just came in YouTube a Obama speech. And it was dialogue versus dominance, and it was really about freedom in the colleges, and it was really geared toward the college level student. And so I brought it into class and had them watch it, and they're saying this was done by AI, and they were very aware of it. But it was very useful also because, okay, so please, where does he use anaphora? Where does he use epistrophe in this particular piece? So I don't know. I was that.
Were you aware of it being AI?
I had suspicions of it because of the way because it's not as seamless as it will soon be. But it had Obama's voice and all the rest of it. So I don't know. I mean, ethically, should I be using this? This might.
I would say yes, but again, to interrogate AI, you have to start from a critical perspective. So, you know, if there's something that looks like Obama, sounds like Obama, you've got to say, oh, what is it that's missing from that? Let's critique it, let's interrogate it, and let's see what it means to be Obama-like, but to have something essential missing. And that something essential is, you know, again, human integrity, human experience, human creativity. So I don't think there's anything wrong with critiquing AI fakes, so long as we do it from a position of, you know, strength of knowledge, and in terms of, you know, interrogating rather than accepting.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Patricia. And we are over time. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jose, but I want to, Mike, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it.
Well, I've really enjoyed it too. It's been excellent. There's some great questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you both. I mean, that was fascinating just to listen to you both talk. A couple of announcements. We will continue the A roundtable talks. Our next talk will be May 16, Empowering Faculty with AI, and that will be Professor Ellis will be there, and Jennifer Sparrow from NYU, Ryan Baker from University of Pennsylvania. Also to mention, Professor Schmerler and I are back at it. If you're interested, we are running our Flex Lab. Anyone who's interested in AI and wants to get hands-on experience, come to our Flex Lab. It will be May 7 at 2 o'clock G604. Come with questions, come with ideas, and we just gonna get on it, play with the tools, and see what we can come out as a collaborative as a collaborative unit. I don't know, Professor Schmerler, you want to mention anything before we go to end the talk, or?
The Flex Lab isn't a lot of more stuff for you to think about that will overwhelm you. It's actually a kind of an amazing sandbox where we will use tech to make your life easier, happier, and make you remember why you like teaching. So that's the stuff. And we really like problem solving, and it's fun, and there may be.
Perfect. I want to thank again Professor Miller and Professor Sharples for coming, and always a pleasure seeing you again. Let's not make another 10 years, and hopefully we can have you back at City Tech.
And everyone, buy the book. It's yeah. I'm sorry, Mike. You were going to say something. Yeah. Yeah.
I will follow up with an email to all participants with the link. Professor Sharples has offered us a link that is a 20% off the original price. So I will send the link to everyone who participated. Please buy the book and support this wonderful Professor Sharples.
It's really good to see you again, Jose, and thank you so much for inviting me.
All right, take care, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Have a
Thank
good
you, everyone.
weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.